This is a non-theistic friendly conversation about meditation about to begin here in 5 minutes. Stay tuned in this open Google Live Hangout on Air.
Okay. You see me now, Scott?
I hear you. One moment. Great,
Great.
Victor. I'm not seeing you yet, but I think I
Well,
will.
there is a video of me, so I think.
I see you now. Great.
Oh,
Fantastic.
great.
I'm glad it
All right.
worked.
Yeah, well, it always takes a little while to figure these things out. I've used Zoom, I guess, and Skype. I haven't used it before.
They're getting easier, but they definitely have been hassle prone for over, in my experience as well, over a couple of years, and they change a little bit each time, which is a challenge as well.
So you need to know where to click.
Yeah,
but that last one you sent me worked, so I just clicked on it, and that was fine.
Did it come up in a text message box to the side?
No, it was. I think it was like this little quotation mark, and I just clicked on that, and that seemed to work.
I sent one to myself, a second Gmail, and found that it came up in the sort of pop-up text box in another browser, so that was new information. Yeah, anyway, here we are. Great.
Okay. So do we have anybody else?
No, I haven't heard of anyone else. Amanda expressed some interest in months ago in NTFs, and Anita said she wouldn't be involved in this conversation. So that's all the feedback I've heard.
Okay. So just you and me so far, or are you expecting anybody else? Or?
I don't think there'll be anyone else. We'll see. But I'm tuning into the list, and I'm seeing who's joined the Hangout. I'm glad we're here. So yeah.
Okay.
Shall we sit for a minute or two in quiet, or what would you?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Shall we begin by addressing the questions we posed, or what would you suggest, Victor?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you saw, I sent an email with an excerpt from something I'm writing that talks about Barclay's book. Did you have a look at that?
I glanced at it.
Okay.
I would love to hear also what meditation means for us personally. Too. What are your where do you? I have the sense that for you it relates to a sort of Zen Buddhist practice of sitting, I think, and emerging also, or dovetailing with a kind of Quaker tradition of silent meeting. What is it for you?
Well, I started out with meditation when I was in college. It turns out he's a funny guy. He was sort of my mentor in late high school and then through college and part of law school. He was a Roman Catholic Benedictine monk, but he had a very funny career because he had been in the British Foreign Service, where he had been stationed in Burma. And I think in Burma, he learned like a mantra meditation technique from somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that must have been like the Theravada tradition. So it was not Zen.
Not Mahayana. Okay. Huh.
Yeah, but it was meditation using a mantra.
Right, right.
Then, so he did that, and then he became a monk, and it's sort of like he kind of gave up the meditation for a while because he didn't know how to fit in, and he was kind of discouraged from doing that. And then eventually he learned of some connections, like some Benedictine monks, and certainly Cistercians, and people like Thomas Merton were Catholic monks who were meditating. And so he realized that it wasn't inconsistent to meditate and be a monk. And that actually there was a somewhat buried tradition going back to John Cassian and the Desert Fathers, but it was sort of a little subterranean, I guess, in the Catholic Church. But he kind of explored that, and then he became like a proselytizer and started explicit Christian meditation society, which is going on even now. It seems to be flourishing, mostly in England, but they're kind of international. They have some places in the US, and it's run by a guy who I knew, who was kind of Father John's sidekick. So anyway, so that's by way of a very long story. That was my.
So those traditions inform your meditation, would you say?
Well, that's how I started out. I started out sort of with this mantra, and they use the mantra Maranatha, which is it means "Come, Lord" in Aramaic. So it's a good, and it's actually in the Bible. It's in one of the letters of St. Paul. So it has some credibility for Catholics or Christians. But then when I was diagnosed with cancer in 2012. I had this incurable cancer. So it's kind of this funny thing where, your life is limited, but you don't know how limited. And I started thinking about, getting back more to things like meditating and Quakerism and things like that. And somehow or other Zen, I started off with Marcus Aurelius, but I got into reading Zen stuff, and when I started reading more about it, I was thinking, yeah, I really like this even better than the mantra technique. It's very spare because there's basically nothing. You don't.
Yeah, there is a kind of non-theistic aspect to Zen, which I really appreciate in a variety of ways, and it's friendly too. Zen Buddhists can be very, very, very friendly in a sort of interesting, personable way. I read some Zen Buddhism some years ago, and so I'm kind of interested in this non-theistic friendly aspect. I appreciate the Quaker focus relating maybe to the traditions you're drawing on as well.
Yeah, and Zen claims, it depends on which Zen you're talking about, but there are certainly, like, the Zen people in the United States are pretty open to different beliefs. And the way I'd put it is that Zen doesn't really make a big deal about beliefs. And so what you call non-theistic is, to me, actually more like, well, beliefs aren't a big deal for us. So if you want to believe in God, okay, but we don't really think that's a big deal, but kind of thing. So if you don't want to believe in God, that's cool too. And we don't actually believe in God or anything else. So so it maybe is an indirect kind of, but more general about the nature of what Zen thinks about belief. And that's another part of my thing that I'm writing, but I didn't put that in there. But
there's an aspect of Zen Buddhism which is all about the here and now, getting to that sort of experience of meditation in the moment, in the present, which I'm grateful and appreciative of. And
well, it's the present moment is the only moment you can experience. So another way of thinking about Zen is the word attention. There's a famous Zen is full of anecdotes. There's a famous anecdote where some eager beaver student was asking a Zen master, well, can you give us like the highlights, the most important parts of Zen, kind of give us sort of the bottom line. And so the guy wrote on the blackboard, attention. And the student kind of looks and thinks, like, can you tell me more? And so the master sort of pondered for a while, and then he wrote again, attention. So
concentration and focus.
And the only thing you can pay attention to is the present moment. So
I guess one of the things that interests me about meditation in the moment is, in the Zen tradition, might be that Satori experience, and I might sort of, I go in the direction language-wise. I hear where you're going a little bit with language, with characterizing the meditation experiences from a variety of perspectives. It is a kind of inner releasing action. I associate it also even with the Harbin Hot Springs warm pool, where there's the warm waters, I think, facilitate something I would say is akin to what goes on in Quaker meeting, a centering down, a de facto relaxation response in the here and now. That's more language to complement yours, perhaps. It's that aspect of non-theistic friendly, sort of non-theistic Quaker that might emerge out of that, I'll call it a centering down experience in Quaker meeting, that is interesting to explore in potentially this conversation about meditation. Where do you go with Quaker process? I know the worship word is, for me, it carries linguistic connotations of worshiping the divine. So a little bit like Anita, tend away from that. But
the thing is, if you're going to be a Quaker, then you have to, I think, to some extent, use the terminology that people use if you want to be part of a community. So to me, meeting for worship is a time when we sit down together. Now, the theistic part, and certainly if you read Berkeley, he talks about waiting on God, right? So he certainly was very theistic. And that to me is kind of the puzzle for non-theistic friends you notice in that excerpt that I did address that issue. And the way I kind of finesse it is that I say that, well, if you're waiting on God, that doesn't mean that you're forming an idea of God. The question is, how do you wait on God? You don't have an idea in your head, God is going to come, here's what God is like, here's what God is going to do. So the process of waiting on God involves emptying yourself of thoughts, which they explicitly said. It's what Berkeley said, even repel the thoughts from your mind. And those thoughts must include thoughts of God. The waiting on God doesn't mean you're thinking about God. So that's kind of a way I finesse it, which is that, okay, we can do whatever it is that you do. When you say you're waiting on God, I can do the same thing. And, I don't think of it as waiting on God, but I'm doing what you're doing. We're doing the same thing together. We're both sitting down. We're doing exactly the same thing. You might want to call it waiting on God, and that's cool. That's but since we're both doing the same thing, from that's sort of the way
I hear you. I really appreciate, emerging out of a kind of Quaker tradition vis-a-vis language or terminology, the ongoing 350-year-old process of renaming Sunday's first day, renaming church meeting, renaming. There's Quakers have been very innovative linguistically over 350 years. Non-theistic friends seem to open an option to move yet further away from, that the language that I have some challenge with. And I appreciate the opening that emerges that non-theistic friends have sort of created with now our conversation exploring, how meditation could be construed, at least as we who join this NTF email list have taken the ideas further.
Yeah. So the way I see it is that the key is to focus on what you are actually doing. And if you are sitting silently and not thinking, and opening yourself some way, being attentive, then you could call that meditation, you could call it meeting for worship, you could call it waiting on God, call it whatever you like. And we're doing this together. So I think there is a difference, because this is another thing that criticism that some people have raised. They say, oh, well, meeting for worship is different from meditating. Meditating is something you do on your own. It's kind of something you do for yourself. I'm not sure I agree with that, but in any case, we agreed that we're sitting together. So we're doing this together. And there is something that happens when you sit together with other people. By the way, it also happens in the Zendo, but
So there's an aspect there of culture, but also, and I'm an anthropologist, and so I would call Quakers as a kind of subculture and Zendo as a subculture,
right,
where language or discourse gives rise to practices, including the practice of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
That aspect of releasing away from even language and culture, when I sit on my own, which I could in the mornings and call it a kind of friendly meditation also, there's a kind of freeing up that occurs maybe with meditation that I appreciate, especially now, NTF meditation, informed sort of language around meditation.
So if you're meditating on your own, the question is, what's the difference between meditating on your own and meditating with a group, or sitting with a group and meeting for worship? I think there is a subtle difference. I mean, I think it's just different if you're doing it. I've experienced that it's different to do it with even just two people, but or more. There's a difference. And maybe part of it is that it kind of helps you, like, you are supposed to be sitting still, completely still. And this is something Quakers, they don't observe it very well. There's no clearing of the throat. There's no coughing. There's no shifting around. You just don't do that. In a Zendo, that's very well understood. Just not as understood in a Quaker meeting. But if you read strictly and carefully what it means to sit in silence, I don't think that it includes moving around or coughing. That's not silent. And if you're sitting in a group, and there's a reason for this, it just works a lot better if you are sitting totally still. I really feel that. So that's where the group helps, because the group helps to keep you still. Part of the reason that it's sort of like shaming, or I realize, or breathing heavily, or, in a way that disturbs other people. I realize I don't want to be disturbing other people. I don't want to be, coughing and stuff like that, because I know that disturbs other people and their silence. And so I don't want to do that. And I want to show them that I'm sitting silently, that we're kind of reinforcing each other's commitment to being silent and seriousness of purpose in this. If they other people see that, hey, this guy is like, he's quiet as a mouse, you know, and that's like, oh, you know, I can do that too. It's like, yeah, so we're kind of leading the way and we're kind of holding each other's hands in that way. And that's the bit that I think where there's the corporate thing that we're all doing this together. We're all, you know, supporting each other in this activity, which is.
Yeah, in the group aspect, you know, I would, in our conversation about meditation, NTF informed, non-theistically friendly informed, I would say, use a word, troop bonding, to explain sort of group behavior. It comes out of a reading of John Money's Exigencies of Being Human. Yes, there is a corporate aspect. Pair bonding is another word of his. Maybe you and I talking together in communicatively here about NTF meditation is an expression of sort of a pair bond, I suppose, that relates to the sort of group aspect or the troop bonding aspect.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy.
Yeah, I don't know that literature, obviously, but I can sort of see what you mean by that. Just.
I really, you know, Angela and Farmer and Victor Van Koten are two yoga teachers who are also kind of old hippies and artists, and they are based in Greece on Lesbos, but they travel around the world teaching yoga in a very creative and innovative way. That aspect of meditation as awareness or consciousness, and maybe, you know, in India, it's often associated with the divine, this explicit language of consciousness with the divine, and even towards a rich language of cosmic consciousness, which doesn't, you know, emerge so richly, combining the words of meditation, consciousness, and say the divine in Berkeley. There's meditation maybe as the worship word, and there's the divine as the God word, but it's not consciousness of through meditation of a kind of inner awareness that's expansive. Those aspects of meditation are very interesting to me.
If you're waiting for God and you're waiting for the Spirit to move you, wouldn't you say that includes an awareness of, you know, cosmic reality and stuff like that? You're trying to be open to God, and if God is pretty broad, you know, doesn't that?
I'm very much on the Richard Dawkins atheistic side of non-theistic friends, atheist Quakers, and you know, I don't want to.
No, but I mean,
bring in this idea of cosmic consciousness.
What I'm saying is, if Berkeley was talking about being open to God, then what was going on, and Berkeley and the other early Quakers, what was going on in their minds may well have been something very similar to being open to the cosmos or whatever, but they were just thinking about it in terms of God. But it's a pretty similar kind of idea, I think. Maybe not exactly the same. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
you know what goes on in people's, because it's sort of the like what was it? James, right, talks about the mystical experience, and ultimately the idea of the blurring of the boundaries between the self and the rest of the universe, which is very much a part of Zen, and or what you mentioned earlier, Satori. That to me is probably what Satori is all about, is realizing that boundary between the self and the rest of the universe is kind of, you know, impermeable, or permeable, or you know, maybe shouldn't be there at all, and that kind of awareness can overlap with being open to God. And we don't know exactly what sort of experience early Quakers had when they were sitting like that, but it could have included that.
Yeah, I mean, the aspect of sort of centering down that leads to a kind of opening that now non-theistically friendly construed might lead to far-reaching inner experiences of expansive release due to, I'll call it biological processes, which include neural processes, which when they're communicated with language, like the words cosmic consciousness, for example, maybe we can bring this into non-theistically friendly conversation and sort of language, can open far-reaching avenues for sort of some of the best experiences in life. And there's a kind of maybe coming home or something like that. I tend to want to explore construing meditation and in a non-theistically friendly way as a very positive thing. The enjoyment is what brings me back to sitting in the morning daily. It's salutary, it's beneficial.
And that can be different for different people. You know, I find I'm probably somewhere in the middle on that, you know, in the sense that there are people who say, well, I just need to sit every day, and if I don't, it's like I feel crummy. And I don't really feel that way. I mean, I get a benefit from it, but I'm, you know, again, it's going to be different for different people, I think. The other thing is I'm skeptical. I think there's, the way I read Zen is that Zen actually doesn't emphasize experience that much, or specifically what kind of experience you have while you're sitting, and sometimes even poo-poos it. I don't know if you know this great word, macchio. You know that?
It's Latin. It's what?
No, it's Japanese.
Okay.
But essentially, it's sort of, you could translate it as kind of like delusions or hallucinations. And there are various things that go on in your brain when you're sitting, especially for beginners. You might have these visions of, they might be good things, they might be evil things. And what Zen teachers basically say is, yeah, and it often, like if you're on a extended meditation retreat and you're really sitting like 4, 5, 6 times a day, you tend to have these. And Zen teachers kind of say, yeah, big deal, you know, just move on. Don't pay too much attention to it. and so, you know, the novice thinks, oh, wow, you know, my meditation is really working. I'm having these great experiences. And it's like, well, so what? You know, so there's this sort of element in Zen of kind of being almost downplaying the experience. It's very funny.
Yeah, no, I mean, having both sat in Quaker meeting a lot, 10 maybe different unprogrammed Quaker meetings. That unprogrammed aspect is another interesting word that comes out of Quaker tradition around meditation, where sort of how one focuses one's mind is open-ended and can be informed by the centering down non-theistically, but also by the communicative process of people sharing and meeting. Those are interesting avenues. But having also taught yoga and really enjoyed Angela Farmer and Victor Van Koten's yoga, there's kind of a guided meditation aspect to both teaching yoga, bringing one's awareness inwardly, and finding ways to release and open that I've enjoyed both learning and teaching about. So I think you're partly raising questions of maybe, or I'll construe it this way, of how non-theistically friendly meditation might be possibly taught, idea-wise, brainstorming-wise. You touching on this, you know, this question from Zen of what happens if, I'll call it negative feelings or thoughts come up. Guided meditation can, you know, if I'm in a course with Angela and Victor in Lesbos, Greece, and they're talking, there's a really sort of remarkable set of processes you go through, partly because Angela's an amazing visionary, and where she goes is very creative in the inner body. but within the non-theistically friendly tradition, you know, I imagine finding that way of how meditation might become salutary relative to negative feelings is an interesting set of questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, meditation is tremendously varied. I mean, there are all kinds of different things you can do. But I guess my conclusion or my argument is that the very spare approach of Zen, which involves simply clearing the mind of thoughts and sitting there and being aware, seems to me to be pretty close to what Berkeley was talking about. So, you know, I don't know where that gets you, but and certainly on the other hand, it's a little hard to reconcile Zen technique with spoken ministry. So somehow you have to. The only way I've thought about it is to say, well, maybe you start off if you're sitting, because you got an hour. If you have an hour, that's a very long time for sitting. So you could sit silently for some portion of that, like half an hour at least, let's say half an hour, 40 minutes, and then have some spoken ministry. That would be kind of a way of dealing with it. But it's certainly not, so that's certainly a difference between, you know, what you would do in a Zendo and what you do in a Quaker meeting is the spoken ministry. So you can't say that the two are the same, because then you would never have any spoken ministry.
Yeah, I mean, everything from William James to the varieties of religious experience, the Harvard professor of 100 years ago, to Houston Smith's The Religions of Man from the late 50s, which sort of suggested, you know, 7 religions. And then perhaps also explored some aspects of meditative practice within some of these. Folks have been trying to explain religion in all its variety in interesting ways. I'm appreciative of both the Quaker traditions of unprogrammed sitting and meeting, and also NTF creative emergences with regard to our exploration of, you know, meditation. I think you're drawing on a remarkable set of practices and traditions from Zen and from Quakerism and other traditions, other Buddhist traditions. That aspect of being tolerant and open to that, and then finding maybe a conversation in either a Quaker meeting or, you know, sharing from our personal experience about meditation. You know, here in the context of non-theistic friends, atheist Quakers, I'll call them, that's sort of an interest of mine, is very interesting. You know, whether we get to a deeper meditation or I'll call it, I want to find out how to explore loving bliss eliciting as brain chemistry more richly. These are questions I've given some thought to emerging out of meditation, but non-theistic friendly meditation, you know, how would that emerge? It's a lot of focus, I suppose, a lot of attention.
Well, all meditation is non-theistically friendly. I mean, that's you're not having ideas about God when you're meditating, no matter what technique you're using.
If the concentration practices and the language of a tradition suggest meditating on this or that, there can be a predicate, you know,
well, yeah, you could,
the object of the verb.
Okay, yeah, those kinds of techniques, maybe, yeah, maybe those. That's right.
But that's yeah, I think we've touched a little bit on all 3 of the questions or queries we sort of came to. I also need to get some things done around here. I'm at Stanford right now, and curious whether there are any fruitful focusing thoughts or questions you might have here in maybe our last few minutes, if you're game for that.
I can't think of anything offhand. And if you saw the thing I sent you, if you have any comments on it, I'd be happy for those. And otherwise, I have to admit, I'm a little bit skeptical about the whole non-theistic category, as but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out ways of kind of reviving Quakerism more generally, and hoping to, for example, enhance the richness of meaning for worship and the seriousness of that experience for people, regardless of their beliefs. I don't think it has anything to do with beliefs. Beliefs, and that's more where I am. Is it's more. I'm more try to think about not about de-emphasizing beliefs rather than talking about how your beliefs are different from my beliefs. Let's say.
Interesting. One of the things that I'm doing these days is developing World University in School, and there's a non-theistic friendly wiki subject page for open teaching and learning that's part of this. So this conversation itself could be added to that page in the way that one adds, a sentence or a resource to a Wikipedia article. And that's one interesting way of carrying on this conversation. I'm appreciative of the non-theistic sort of idea and way of thinking for many of the reasons people have shared on the list over. It's probably coming on 10 or 15 years now, I guess. It's a sustaining list in conversation, maybe because you have questions about it also, which keeps you engaged with the list. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think that there are very few people that are really totally comfortable with the word non-theism. I think people realize that it's maybe the least bad of the possible labels that one might use. So.
No, I'm very appreciative of Richard Dawkins' clear reasoning for atheism.
Frankly, I'm very much down on Dawkins because I think Dawkins is very cheap. I think he just creates this straw man kind of thing and knocks it down. It's like, oh, great, you can do that. But if you read serious theologians, they don't believe in the kind of God that Dawkins says doesn't exist. So,
No, I'm an appreciator of both the significance of evolutionary biology, 3.5 billion years of life, 3 to 100 million species, and how human experience, including, I'll call it meditation and centering down, can affect this biology. Herbert Benson, MD, attempted to study it in '71 and found oxygen content lowering. But to describe meditation as a response sort of touches for me more into an evolutionary biological framework, which Richard Dawkins also, I'm a fan of Richard Dawkins' thinking. I'm a fan of his characterization of religion. I don't think he gets into questions of the benefits of atheist meditation that I haven't read yet. He's more of a thinker, an apologist along the lines that Berkeley was, but again, religion rather than explaining Quakerism. And I'm glad these voices are so articulate. Dawkins is not alone, but is a first among many. But where the benefits of non-theistic meditation can emerge or continue to interest me, and World University and Schools wiki subject page can be a potential way to explore this conversation further.
Send me a link to it. I'll have a look.
Okay, great.
Okay, very good. Well, so nice to talk to you, Scott.
Likewise, Victor. Nice to meet you here face to face, if not person to person. Okay.
Okay, good luck.
Thank you. See you anon.
Yeah, you've got more hours in your day than I'll have in mine. So.
We're 3 hours behind. Okay. Bye.
Okay, bye.